Hello, Deltarune fans. This is the Newbie Gamer, and I have found something I haven't seen talked about anywhere else yet. While playing through the weird route, I explored around the house and noticed a small detail I didn't notice in my first few playthroughs. Sitting where Asgore normally stands was a black sword, so I have been looking at everything involving this sword and what it may imply, and I'm here to bring it to you and give my thoughts on it. First off is where to find the sword itself. Most people won't even see that it exists. Most people know about the room Asgore goes into when you can travel throughout the vents, and his dialogue about a black shard, most assuming he has a shadow crystal. However, most people don't then return to that room to look where he once stood, to then see a handle and a black blade to a mysterious sword. If you didn't know you could find him while going through the vents, you're able to go and first see him in the bathroom, where he leaves and ends up in this room. You can find this room by going to the start and taking your first right, then north at the intersection and continue left. To see the sword, which is only really visible when Asgore is not in the room, go before seeing the dialogue in the bathroom. That is the easy way to do it, but leaving and coming back after his dialogue about the black shard ends works as well. The easiest way, though, is finding it in the weird route where Asgore is just absent entirely. It even fits why he begins by saying, "my old friend," likely addressing the sword itself. The fact he calls it a black shard rather than a shadow crystal is an important distinction as well, since the weapon we get from the knight is also called the black shard. So this means the line is probably referring to a weapon of some kind rather than a shadow crystal. So I know the consensus on this is somewhat solid for some, but for me I found that Asgore has a surprising amount of evidence being the knight. People are pretty sure it's Carol or Des Holiday. Carol due to her surprising fondness of Chris and introduction alongside the knight, and Des due to her mysterious nature and her dominant hand lining up with the knights. I pose a single question though that may change how you think about that answer. How would either of them overpower Undyne in the light world for long enough to carry her across town into the shelter? We actually get an answer to this in Undertale out of all places, where Undyne tells us that she tried to fight Asgore, with an emphasis on tried. So he's the only character we're told of in these games that could overpower Undyne so far. We don't see anyone of comparable strength, so it seems logical that either Carol is extremely yoked and we don't know, or Asgore is the one who carried Undyne to the shelter at the very least, and the knight at the very worst. So that still doesn't prove that Asgore is the knight. He could just be working with whoever the knight is, then waiting to carry Undyne out to the shelter while the actual knight makes a getaway. There's still a few more details that line up with Asgore in ways that don't for Carol, hinted at earlier, which has to do with their dominant hands. When we leave Noelle's house, Carol reaches out to Chris with her right hand, something you would do with your dominant hand. Being that this is one of the only moments we have to see this character, this detail felt very specific, like a reveal for another playthrough. Well, if you take a look at what hand the knight holds the sword with, you will see that it's with their left, not their right. This is where the idea of Des being the knight comes from. She has a more mysterious role in the story, so she could be in the dark rooms and areas that we find ourselves in. And on top of that, she is left-handed like the knight. This is found by looking at her computer mouse position in her room, giving her an edge over Carol on the debate on who the knight is. However, something people overlook is that Asgore is also left-handed. In Deltarune, we do have a small moment I think shows his dominant hand, when he gives Chris a little pat. Similar to Carol, he does use his right hand to pat Chris, but unlike Carol, his other hand is occupied holding a snack tray. It could just be a preference, but I would hold the tray with my dominant hand for better control over it so it doesn't spill, while I use my other hand for other things, like pats. If you think that isn't enough for reason that he is left-handed, that's fair. I just wanted to show an example from this game, but I do have a second one that you might remember. It's a moment from Undertale. He holds his trident in his left hand to destroy the mercy button. If the mercy button is on the right for us, then in his mirrored position, it is on his left. So maybe after all that, you still aren't convinced. These things could just be used for aesthetics, like Carol's right hand being used for a clear view to players to show what she's doing, rather than to indicate her dominant hand, or Asgore destroying the mercy button with the left, only due to it being on the position on the GUI. So let us start at another angle. How does Carol get to all these places without anyone noticing the mayor isn't in office? Like, how could she just be standing in a closet in the library in the church without anyone taking note of it? Or if it was Des, if she could move between the dark worlds and light world freely, why hasn't she reunited with her family? She was shown to be rebellious, but still young when she disappeared, shown by Tenna's TV Trauma Time. She's also not given a motive for these actions. We see that she was rebellious, sure, but so is Susie. And she isn't trying to expose the dark world to the light world by causing the roaring like the night is. However, we do know of someone with these kinds of motives, Asgore. He claims to know about something he wants others to see, that most likely being dark worlds, with him knowing about the Black Shard. So the motives match and their capabilities match, but there still seems to be something off. Oh, how could he be the king trapped in asylum if he also is the knight? In other words, why is he depicted as a lightener if he is the knight? Doesn't that break the theory? No, since I asked the question, I have an answer that makes sense when you think about it. You can equip items. It makes sense that he could too. So, what do I mean by this? Well, you gain unique abilities based on what items you take into the dark world. We get our power from pencils and stickers. If Asgore is bringing the sword we see him with, then we are bringing a literal pencil to a sword fight. It also gives him the ability to both pick up and drop the item, which would let him both be a lightener and the knight by equipping the sword. There's something else I'd like to touch up on before continuing with the idea. The appearance of the knight itself. People are saying the horns are a clear indication of the Holiday family since they are the only ones to have the little nubs like the knight does. However, I feel like with what I've said previously, my next connection is going to be pretty clear. Asgore has similar sized horns to the knight, more evident when it tilts its head down, while the Noel family has small straight antlers. The knight and Asgore both have large curving horns. That connection would have great implications as to what's actually going on with the knight. If this item can be equipped, then so can the form. If so, why does this form give you the nubs associated with the Holiday family? This is the insane part of the theory, but what if Des is inside the sword? Now I know it's a crazy thought, but what if it actually ties in with what we see with Gerson? While now we've gone into pure theory and speculation, I still want to tie it with what we see in the game, like with comparing the antler sizes. The claim that Des is somehow inside a sword seems like it isn't possible and doesn't really fit with this, especially since we should at least be seeing Des in Dark Worlds or something, right? I think we're seeing a result of information we have but used in a different way. Not that her dust is being used to fill the sword, but her soul. All living monsters do have souls, just fragile and normally unable to persist outside of death. How, why they did this? Unknown, but my best guess is that Des was sick, like Rudy, and to preserve her, connecting back with what Rudy says about Carol at church, they put her into the sword, but in doing so made the knight. To explain her absence, they claim she was missing, so they can reintroduce her once they find a cure without many questions being raised about where she was. Maybe the knight is a result of a darkener having a soul, since the sword itself would have been a darkener in a dark world as an inanimate object. So the main reason I even thought this might be an answer is just due to the common mythology, like the man and the sword myth. I've seen this a good few times in a few different pieces of media, so when I seen the sword and came down to these conclusions of why Asgore would have characteristics if holding the sword, if the sword has its own characteristics, it made me think of the man and the sword myth. That was the first thing I could think of when thinking of something like that. And the idea of the man and the sword in this game is rather interesting, since the sword, like I was saying earlier, is an inanimate object. It should be a darkener in dark worlds, like most other inanimate objects are. But if it has a soul like a lightener does, what does it become, Does it seems to be something like the knight, whatever it is, but we don't have a lot of information, and I'm just kind of spitballing at it. I just found a few things here and there, and just wanted to present mostly the sword, honestly. That's kind of why I made the video, was just kind of showing that off. I haven't really seen anyone talk about that or its relevance. People are saying that, the knight is using the sword in the kitchen, despite it being decorative, and it would be noticeable if it gets moved around because it's, hooked into those, or a theoretical bat that Des would have, when this sword is just sitting in the house. It's just right there. So I feel like I just had to make a video on that to just show that off, and I wanted to go and delve into my thoughts on it. So this is all a wild turn from the normal discussions about who the knight is, but I feel like we also thought Mike was Tenna for a while there. I feel like we were shown an obvious connection with Carol and Des for Asgore to now be that surprise connection that we're missing right underneath our noses. The way I can imagine this reveal happening, too, is Asgore being beaten in some confrontation in Chapter 5, bending down, then picking up what looks to be nothing. But as he raises it, you can see the sword, which will cover him in this darkness we see envelop the knight, and become the knight themselves. From a king to a knight, with what happened at the end of Chapter 4, you could say he's been deboned. If you guys got to this point in the video, thank you so much for watching. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you guys wanted to see more. Talk about any discoveries you guys made in the comments below. Talk about anything that this may have made you think about in the comments below. I'll be sure to read through them. I have more ideas about the game itself. I have a theory about Chapter 3, something that happens in there, and something about the game overall. Both, I think, are very interesting ideas that are worth another one of these kinds of videos. I'll go through, play through, like, you guys could suggest bosses you guys want me to fight. I absolutely got shredded by the night trying to make a background video for this. That's why you can see me transition to the house gameplay midway. So, if you guys wanted to see anything else, let me know. Let me know what kind of bosses you guys want the newbie gamer to fight, and we'll, take it from there. One last thing, there is some bloopers here at the end. I recorded a few times over, very new to this, so there's some mistakes along the way, and I made sure to put some of them down here in the first video so you guys can go and laugh at them. Alright, bye. This is where the idea of Des being the knight comes from. She has a more mysterious role, so she could be the dark room. She's the dark rooms. It's over. He begins by saying, "My old friend," likely addressing the sword itself. The fact he calls it a black shard rather than a shadow crystal is an important distinction as well, since the weapon we get from the knight is called a black shard, and the crystal you get from beating the knight are two separate things in the inventory. Oh god, this set feels really... Actually, I changed the script. This is where the idea of Des being the knight comes from. She has a more mysterious... She was shown to be rebellious, but still young when disappeared. Like fucking Thanos, she got snapped. Well, now we've gone into pure theory and speculation at this point. Like comparing antler sizes, I want to still compare... I still want to compare it, man. I still want to compare it. My antler size. I want to compare it. Compare my antler size in a room, giving her an edge over Carol in the debate on who the knight is. However, something people overlook is that Asgore is also left-handed. Ex-husband.